Okay. So
We'll put it all
obviously,
straight because these are the things that people ask about, right?
yeah,
Resistance training, cardiovascular training, and we'll call it mobility and
yeah,
flexibility training, right? So we want to know, as we were saying, like one of the goals of our coaching and one of the broad brushstroke goals is you want to know how to execute a training program and you want to know how to design a training program, right? So this kind of covers both of those. Like, why are we doing resistance training? Why are we doing cardio training? And why are we doing mobility training? And then we can start looking at the like what the specifics of that. Then we can look at like how much are we going to do of each of these different things. And again, we should obviously know the why behind that as well.
yeah. And that why question, again, it all starts with the goal setting. So, like I've already kind of mentioned that, but when it comes to resistance training, obviously one of the primary reasons one would engage in resistance training is to get stronger. Okay. Now, what that means is different to different people. For the general population, getting stronger doesn't mean squat, bench, deadlift, 1 rep max. Okay. All we're talking about is that we're increasing our force production, generally relevant to relative to specific tasks. So when we're training in the gym and we're doing lots of bench pressing, we get stronger at tasks that are similar to bench press. The closer it is to bench press, the more that strength is going to be specific. The further you get away from that, the less of a carryover there's going to be. It's a very simple principle of resistance training. So that's something that's may seem obvious and may seem simple, but it's actually quite important, because what you'll see is that a lot of people will have goals related to resistance training that are not reflected in their programming. So, for example, their stated goal might be, I want to develop as much, upper body strength, especially my chest and shoulders, as possible. But they're only training chest and shoulders once per week, and they're training back, arms, legs all the other days, doing loads of cardio, which is fine. We're all for being well rounded, but not if that's your stated explicit reason for training. Okay. So you need to have that reflected within your programming.
It's like going, I'm a powerlifter, I want to get good
Yeah.
at powerlifting, and you're doing 5 days per week of marathon training. It's like, look, we're not specific here. We haven't designed our program with your goals in mind.
Yes. So that strength element is, I guess, a performance quality um, that is, again, specific to the situation, but it carries over as well to different activities. So, for example, if you're a runner, you might want to develop your strength because it'll improve the qualities of your tendons and ligaments and your bone mineral density, and your muscles for when you're running up hills, that you'll have a little bit more endurance because you're used to higher forces, etc., etc. Okay, so there's different ways that you could break down strength when talking about specific tissues. So tendon strength, or ligament strength, or bone strength, or muscle strength, etc. Okay, but all of those come back to the ability to produce or absorb force effectively.
The
Muscle
way I
building is,
always kind of quantify it, I'm like, look, resistance training is just improving your body's ability to handle load, right? And it's like that is either to be able to push it away or pull it towards you or whatever. Or like you said, it's like, it's actually, you're running uphill. It's like, oh, your body can actually handle these forces that you're putting it under.
yeah, and you can kind of subcategorize strength as well into different subcomponents. For example, high velocity versus low velocity strength. If you're javelin thrower or some other activity that's very explosive, sprinting, you might want to do more high velocity strength work. So that just means that you're moving lighter weights at higher velocities so that you're training those patterns a little bit more specifically. Whereas if you're a rugby player who is getting stuck into the scrum, you're using more low velocity strength in those contexts. And as a result, you might do more work closer to 1 rep max where bar speed is a little bit lower. So you can obviously break that down further. People will use the term power a lot. Generally, what they mean is high velocity strength. And then resistance training also has some subcomponents like plyometrics, for example. That's technically resistance training as well. So the overall point there, just to introduce it, is that you're developing strength. There's many different subcomponents there. And then one of the big side effects or byproducts of that strength training process, depending on the program, is muscle building. Okay. So muscle building or hypertrophy is not necessarily a specific component of fitness. There's not one way of training for it. It's effectively a side effect of the training process. So if you're doing a program that's oriented towards strength, even if it's like high velocity strength or power based, you'll still build some muscle. Okay, it doesn't have to.
Just to also interject there, like when we say strength, like people oftentimes think, oh, they're talking about the 1 to 5 rep range. When we're talking about strength, like we're talking about strength across the spectrum. It's like I'm talking about strength from your 1 rep max all the way to your fucking 100 rep max. It's all strength. While obviously in the health and fitness world these days, people think of strength and go, oh, it's we're talking about triples here or singles or doubles. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you do sets of 100, they might be called sets for muscle endurance, but effectively what that is the ability to continue expressing strength as you fatigue, at a given percentage. So those adaptations are always going to be specific to wherever you're at on that rep spectrum, that times under tension spectrum, but also going to be general as well to some degree. Okay, and hypertrophy, as I say, is effectively the byproduct of that process. And we know that there are certain training principles that lead to more hypertrophy. So if your program, generally has more sets, more reps overall, you're doing maybe like 6 to 15 reps most of the time. You're doing lots of sets, and you're control tempo, control focused more internally, I guess, on making the exercise hard for your muscles rather than making it as easy as possible. All those things are generally going to lead to an increase in the stimulus for hypertrophy. So it's something that is very often a goal that you would run, that you might have in parallel to something else. So very often people say, I want to get stronger and bigger. That's what people often say, bigger and stronger. I want to get stronger and I want to, be more muscular. That's what people would typically say. And those things go hand in hand a lot of the time. For some people, they mightn't actually want that. So what a lot of people want, athletes in particular, is that they might want to improve their relative strength. Okay. So for example, they're an MMA fighter who's already, basically at the limit of their weight class, and they don't want to go up. So they might want to just improve their strength, but not necessarily gain muscle. Very often as well, soccer players, GA players who feel like, I'm really happy at the weight I'm at. I feel light on my feet here. I'm solid for my position still, but I want to get stronger. Just don't really want to add weight to my body. Those types of goals can be trained for by adopting more of the strength oriented training. Maybe you are using lower repetition ranges. Maybe you have some high velocity strength in there. You're taking those strength components of fitness that I mentioned, and you're breaking them down and really specifying what you're aiming at without looking for that byproduct of hypertrophy. And obviously that's driven by nutrition too.